Thank you for all of your comments on my Nautilus videos. Now, a common theme I've noticed is that many of you are comparing the Nautilus down here with the MODX, and that's inevitable. Both of these are cheaper versions of their respective flagship instruments. I'm not completely convinced it's a fair comparison. These two are in different price classes with different features. But I thought that would be a great topic for a video. Let's discuss that today. The MODX came out first, and this is a cheaper version of Yamaha's flagship Montage synthesizer. What they've done is removed a lot of the front panel controls, made it in plastic instead of metal, slightly cheaper feeling Keybed and so on to get the price down. But the Montage is about $3,000, I believe, in US, whereas this one is less than half the price, $1,200 to $1,400, and it has exactly the same sound engine as the Montage, although I think it does lose the sampler perhaps. Not quite sure about that, but you get exactly the same sounds as you get on the Montage, which is really great. That's an awesome instrument. The Nautilus was newly released just a couple of weeks ago, and this is a less expensive version of their KRONOS flagship workstation synthesizer keyboard. It does contain all of the exact same sounds and I believe functionality of the KRONOS, but they've added a few things as well. But the most important thing here is you're getting all of the sound engines of the KRONOS. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And all of the same sounds, plus some new sounds actually, new presets, new samples that are more up to date than what we get on the KRONOS. But as you can see, they've stripped away all of the controls, or most of the controls of the KRONOS. This one costs about $2,000, whereas the KRONOS costs right now about $2,500. It's been on sale on a few of the retailers. So the Nautilus is a lot closer to the price of the flagship than the MODX is. So on first glance, for value for money then, if you want a flagship at vastly reduced prices compared to the flagship, then the MODX certainly seems to represent a better proposition. Well, for those of us considering the Nautilus, right now at least, it might be worth paying a little bit more and getting the KRONOS. Build construction and quality is really important to me, and it's probably very important to you too. I'm happy to report that the Nautilus is really rather outstanding. It's got this lovely aluminium top panel. The base here underneath is aluminium as well, as are the sides here. There is some plastic as well, but overall a really premium, high quality feeling instrument. Whereas on the other hand, the MODX is entirely a sort of hollow plastic box. It is a sturdily built thing. It doesn't feel fragile or flimsy or flexy or creaky in any way, which is excellent, but it's not in the same league as the Nautilus. And this is something that probably won't come across so well on the video. You'll have to go and experience it for yourself in the music stores. Yeah, I can even show you underneath there. You can see it's entirely plastic. So it is kind of nice just knowing this is made of metal. You get that lovely cool feeling to the touch, and it does make it a more enjoyable experience to play overall, I think. However, the lightweight plastic construction of the MODX does have some advantages. If you're a gigging musician and carrying this one with you, then you're going to appreciate the fact that this weighs 7 kilograms, whereas this one weighs 14 kilograms. As you can see, also it's much more compact since they've placed the controllers above the keyboard and not to the left. So if you're transporting these to the gig or to the practice room, this might be a better option. As for design then, well, it feels like Korg have gone to town with the Nautilus. It does look reminiscent to their workstations of the 90s actually, since it's so stripped down. However, we look closely, you see these nice swooshes and swoops with the aluminium surfaces here that swoop up to meet each other. I think this is inspired by the ocean, I did read somewhere. The Nautilus, of course, is a nautical theme. This is like a shell kind of shape, so they've put a bit of design effort into that. Whereas on the MODX, I think it's fair to say, Although it's not ugly by any means, there's not quite so much design effort gone into this. Apologies if I'm out of order there, but that's my impression anyway. Although it does have a very nice retro looking MODX logo here. Although I'm not sure why we need to be reminded what keyboard we're playing. I imagine right now that you are screaming at your screens for me to play these instruments. Well, don't worry, rest assured, I have done plenty of demos of these over the last few weeks. And in the case of the MODX, the last couple of years, so here's a little musical montage. Ah, wrong choice of words. A little musical compilation. That's more like it. Too much? what about the feeling of the keys then? Well, you won't believe how many questions, comments, and in fact even emails I've received on this very topic. So starting with the MODX, I've got no problems at all with the keys on the MODX. I know some guys criticize them, but I've found them to be quite satisfactory. They are quite, if I shut up for a bit, clacky and noisy, but they're nice and dynamic to play. It works well for synths and pianos, I think. Listen to that. But compared to the Nautilus here, I'm playing with the same force. So this is a much smoother and quieter keybed. Also feels like the keys are slightly wider, especially on the black notes where they feel narrow up here. But I actually like both of these keyboards very much, but I would have to say the Nautilus does have the edge. It feels rather more premium and high quality than the keys we get on the MODX, but both get the job done perfectly adequately. Okay then, here's the biggie, the user interface. Let's just tip that up again. Now there's quite a difference, an obvious difference between these two. Whilst the MODX is pretty stripped down compared to the Montage, they have kept a lot of buttons here. You've got, for example, buttons for the sequencer transport control, which is really nice. 4 assignable knobs here, well actually a matrix with 4 different rows of functions. These are endless rotaries. We have 4 faders instead of the 8 on the Montage, but 4 is better than nothing, although it's rarely enough. But we have these switches here to toggle between them. Here are the buttons to activate the scenes. Over here, buttons for the different modes, the navigation, and so on. So yeah, it's actually quite a workable user interface. Whereas KORG have been much more ruthless. It's quite apparent on what they've removed from the KRONOS. Now the KRONOS is absolutely festooned with faders, knobs, buttons, and so on. And actually a bigger screen than what we get here, whereas the MODX screen is identical to the Montage. But yeah, KORG have really stripped it back here. You do get these funky buttons that you can click in and out and turn. Now, to be honest, these knobs don't feel as good as the ones on the MODX. Far from it. They are quite small. It's hard to get your fingers in between because they're quite closely together as well. Although you might like this pop-in feature if you're transporting the keyboard and don't want to damage the knobs, if that's something that's important to you. We also have far fewer buttons than we do on the MODX. You don't, for example, have any sequencer transport buttons, although these quick access buttons can be set in a particular mode where they do act as transport buttons. I've been using these quite a lot, but I find it quite hard to remember what each button does since they are configurable and so forth. So they're not actually labeled on the front panel here. You have to try and remember, and I just am incapable of remembering what 6 different buttons do in all of the various modes. And then of course we have to talk about the super knob here. A fantastic controller. Some of you might see it as a gimmick, especially when it's flashing and pulsating. And yes, let's get those pulsating super knob jokes out the way right now. But this is actually a fantastic controller. It's really great to grip onto, nice and smooth to turn. It's an endless thing as well. You've got this LED collar to show you what the settings are. You can see right now this is being automated by a motion sequencer feature or something similar. Pretty cool. But this is actually a morph control. You can assign this to change many different parameters at once, and during a performance I just normally grab onto this, turn it, see what happens, and it does change the sound in really radical ways. You can completely transform the sound of the performance that you're doing. It's really excellent, and I found that to be a bit more lacking on the Nautilus. You don't have such a mega control as this, and I find myself just typically grasping for the cutoff. But it doesn't make for such exciting performances as this awesome super knob. Also over here we have a joystick versus the traditional pitch bend mod wheel. This has an advantage for me because you can assign this to do interesting things like filter cutoff, push it up and it stays in the same position, whereas this one springs back. You can configure these to lock the position, but it's just a bit more fiddly to do in the heat of the moment. As for the screens, we have pretty much identical screens down here. Now, these are the older style technology where you've got a thin plastic membrane that you actually have to push down on a little bit. It's not completely like a glass iPad screen or like we're used to on our telephones and mobile devices these days. It does require a very light push, and the resolution is not like super high retina or anything like that, but I think they are pretty much adequate for the job. Both of them fairly identical, or this one seems to have slightly more vivid colors and contrast, but pretty much the same thing. This one seems to support, we're on the Nautilus now, a little bit more drag than what we get on the MODX, which is very much just press a parameter and then use the encoder there to change the value. This one does support dragging, but it's a bit hit and miss. I don't normally get it right and end up clicking it and using the encoder anyway in the same fashion. And you can forget about things like pinch to zoom. That just doesn't exist with this kind of technology. Multi-touch, not possible either. It's one fader at a time. One observation I have on the screens here then is that the MODX is much cheaper and a couple of years old, so you can give perhaps Yamaha a bit of a pass on including a lower technology screen on this instrument, whereas the Nautilus is newly released in 2020. It costs a lot more money, $2,000, and perhaps that sets our expectations a little bit higher. And I, for one, think this synthesizer deserved a much nicer screen for the price, and also for these amazing capabilities that it has. I think it needs a better user interface to really get the most out of them. It is kind of cool with the big graphics here though, I have to say. And it's probably quite an impressive thing when you see one of these for yourself in the store. It certainly does catch the eye. Now, boot up time is important to many of you as well. I know that by reading the comments. Happy to say the MODX is pretty snappy. It boots up in about 20 seconds or so. I haven't actually timed it, but you just switch it on. Pretty soon you're good to go. Whereas the Nautilus is more like you switch it on way in advance of when you need it. You go and do something else, bit of washing up, checking your YouTube comments or something like that, and when you come back, it's ready. Okay, seriously, it's probably 2 minutes or something, pretty much just like the KRONOS. When I started this today, I heard fans whirring up inside, which I haven't heard before. Mercifully, they switched off by themselves when the instrument had booted up. What about the sound engines then? This is an interesting topic, one of the biggest differentiators between these two. Bit of a mouthful there. The MODX has its sample playback Rompler technology AWM2, and it has the FMX, an amazing FM synthesizer engine with 8 operators, a lot more advanced features than what we had on the DX7, although it is derived from that. That's why it's called the MODX, by the way, not the MODX. It's even the same DX7 logo, which I think is really cool. 2 sound engines. This one also has your sample playback engine, HD1, I think KORG call it, and it has an FM synthesizer engine that is also compatible with DX7 patches. That's really interesting. But in addition, it has 7 more sound engines, all of which are absolutely fantastic. I can vouch for that, having tried them out. We have, for example, a dedicated piano engine. This one does a lot more physical modeling with the piano sounds. Same thing for an electric piano engine. We have a magnificent CX3 Hammond organ clone wheel emulation kind of thing. String modeling engines, virtual analog engines. Yeah, the list goes on. So for you sound designers, this, I think, sound-wise, does what the MODX can do, but a lot more. And that's one of the extra features you'll be paying a little bit more for if you choose the Nautilus. That's why it costs more. On the other hand, the MODX has some really nice contemporary effects that don't seem to be here on the Nautilus. We have things like the side chain effects, we have the envelope followers, and we have the amazing motion sequencer, which really animates the sound. You can actually program stepped changes in various parameters, which will then repeat and loop as you're holding down a key. It sounds really, really awesome. It gives you some of these really more modern EDM kind of style sounds, future bass and so on, which is really exciting, I think. Whereas this one seems to have more traditional effects derived from the KRONOS, which are perhaps a little bit more dated than the ones on the MODX. And you can really hear those in action on the performance demos I did here on the MODX. Okay, let's come around the back. A little bit gloomy around here, not much light, but hopefully I can explain what's going on. Both of these pretty fully featured, got everything you could probably want. The Nautilus, however, has a few extra pro features on the back. We have individual outputs as well as a stereo pair, whereas the MODX just has stereo pair. I think I read somewhere that these might be balanced outputs as well, which is a more professional feature giving you the potential for lower noise, but don't quote me on that, because I'm not sure where I read that one. For the MIDI, we have an extra port on the Nautilus. We have MIDI through, if that's something that's important to you. We, as you can see, have an internal power supply with a wall wart on the MODX 6, whereas much more professional on the Nautilus with an internal power supply. And look, a little LED as well. Regarding the USB, both of them have this kind of socket and this kind of socket. I have a USB drive hooked up here with some expansion libraries, but there is some differences here that are quite interesting. This one, USB to host, you connect to your PC for connectivity with your DAW. This one on the Yamaha is multi-track audio and MIDI, which is really fantastic. Whereas on the Nautilus, it's not quite as capable. We have MIDI, just like on the Yamaha, but only stereo USB up and down to your DAW, which is a real shame, I think. A nice thing here though, this socket here can be used not only to transfer samples and do backups of the synthesizer, but you can also connect up a USB device, such as a keyboard, a computer keyboard, yes. Or in fact, more interestingly, something like a KORG Nano control, giving you back the faders that are missing on the Nautilus. So we did touch a little bit there on expansions. There are some big differences between these two as well. The MODX comes with 1 GB of flash memory on which you can store expansion packs, sample libraries, or your own samples. Whereas the Nautilus has a 60 GB hard drive built in, or it's S8 SSD, a flash drive. So a lot more potential for storing your own sounds on the Nautilus. Also more potential for third-party sample library developers to create much more interesting, complex and detailed sample libraries of, for example, electric pianos or something, than what's possible on the MODX. Now, I don't know much about this feature, so I'm going to be deliberately vague, but the MODX did lose the sampler that you get on the Montage, whereas the Nautilus keeps the sampler that you get on the KRONOS. And it's a very capable sampler as well. And I think the sequencer here on the Nautilus is also more advanced than on the MODX. You can, for example, record or play back full audio tracks, multi-track audio on the Nautilus, which is something that's not possible on the MODX. This is just a MIDI sequencer. Let's wrap this up then. If your budget is $1,200, $1,300, or whatever this costs in your region, then you cannot go wrong with the MODX. I highly recommend it. What a capable and amazing instrument for the price. However, if you have a little bit more to spend, then hopefully I've highlighted some of the extra things that you do get with the Nautilus that maybe justify the extra price. It depends on what's important to you, so you'll have to decide that for yourself. But hopefully I've been able to highlight the main differences between these two, so you can make your own decision if you're interested in purchasing one of these for yourself. That's all for now then. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to read your comments. I'll see you next time. Cheerio.